So, two things. First, let me apologize for using English for the presentation today. Unfortunately, my French is almost non-existent, even if I'm starting to learn it. Second, of course, a big thank you to the Biennale for inviting me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today. My talk today is centered on tactical publishing using sensors, software, and archives in the 21st century, which, not by accident, is also the title of my last book, published actually already a couple of years ago. Let me just introduce myself quickly. I'm associate professor at the Winchester School of Art, University of Southampton in UK. Associate professor of art design and media. I'm part of this research group called AMT, Archaeology of Media and Technology. Indeed, I'm program lead of a Bachelor of Science called Creative Computing. And I'm the chief editor and founder of this magazine called Neural, founded quite a while ago, 1993. This is the 30th anniversary issue that we celebrated a bit less than 3 years ago. It's a magazine about new media art, but it's also meant to be an experimental magazine. In Neural, we hosted almost 30 artist interventions with various materials. My first proper book about publishing was called Post-Digital Print, The Mutation of Publishing since 1894. It's from 2012. You can freely download it from the web domain postdigitalprint.org. It has been translated. I mean, it was a real surprise for me that it became quite successful over the years. And it has been translated into a few different languages: Italian, Korean, Spanish. There's a French edition curated by Édition B42. Probably tomorrow it will be available in the fair. And there's even a Chinese and translation in Chinese a few years after. Tactical publishing, published in 2024. 12 years after the other, is a kind of sequel of Post-Digital Print. And it has been published by MIT Press, but it's open access. So you can download each chapter, you can download the whole book. Luckily, this is something that is possible with the collaboration between the university and academic publishers now. And I think it's very fair, all in all. Okay. A quick look at the different chapters. In the first chapter, the realm of the senses, evoking a quite famous movie. It's about the differences, especially the biological differences in how we read on paper and how we read on the screen. So how we read physical matter and how we read the digital matters. The second chapter, it's called Non-Human Writing. Those in bold, I will get back to them in a few minutes. It's about writing by machines, autonomously made by machines, or in collaboration with machines. Third chapter is called Activist Post-Truth Publishing. It is trying to reconstruct the history of fake publishing. Interestingly, if you look back in history, especially before the internet, false publications have been used, especially by leftist activists, and only after social media it has become mostly used by right-wing publishing. The fourth chapter is called Endlessness, the digital publishing paradigm. I will again elaborate about that in a little bit. The fifth It's called Libraries as a Cultural Guerrilla. It's a study about libraries, especially small independent libraries. Also, I mean, most of my work is dedicated to independent publishers compared to the big commercial ones, to enhance them, to trying to support them, thinking about a systematic organization that can support them as a whole. The sixth chapter is how we should publish in the 21st century. Is a kind of a small manifesto, if you want, but it's synthesizing all the major ideas in the book. Then there is an appendix, with which I confess, quite a bit of fun. It's called An Annotated List of 100 Experiments of Publishing for the 21st Century. It's 100 books or publications or of all sorts, magazines, zines, that somehow embody an innovative concept when it comes to publishing. All of them published after year 2000. Okay, I will start with a kind of a big question, which is, what is a book in the 21st century? Well, I mean, it's of course an open question. I don't have a definitive answer, but I think it's more a generational question what the answer might be. For the older generations, it's still an object. We have been trained on books. We grew up with physical books mostly. For us, it's a book has a very defined space. It has an occupation in space. We can literally refer to where it is in space, whether it is on a table or on a bookshelf or in a library. And especially, it's a finite object. We can really see that where it starts and where it ends. For younger generations who grew up with screens, sometimes even before physical print, physical books, it's more a concept. If you mention the word book to me, I immediately visualize a physical book. But if you mention the same thing to younger generation, most of the time they think about some body of work. Yes, it's finite, but it's not very clear where it is, and especially how it will be read. So to find a better definition, I could mention Ulysses Carrion, one of the most prominent and interesting people who have experimented a lot with publishing. And in 1975, he wrote this, The New Art of Making Books, and he defined it, as you can see, as an autonomous space-time sequence. It's a definition that, honestly, I really love, because it involves these two dimensions that I think are related to anything that we relate to when it's about media, space and time. And when it comes to publishing, of course, the space is the space of publishing, how we occupy it somehow. In the previous beautiful presentations, there were quite a few examples of how the space of publishing was used, and time is the time when the publication is somehow activated. It's when you use it. It's when it passes from being somehow dormant to be active, to be alive. Okay, let me elaborate a bit about chapter number 2, called Non-Human Writing. And again, here the approaches are at least a couple ones. Machine writing, which is what is highly debated, used, and speculated nowadays, especially because of AI. So the machine writing autonomously, the so-called generative process, or process where the machine autonomously takes the decision, even fed with human input, but minimal somehow to write long text. And instead writing with a machine, which is a different concept. It's using the machine as much as possible for its possibilities in order to elaborate text, elaborate concepts, text, writing more in general. Okay, I would like to show one example, especially, that is writing with a machine. It's from almost 10 years ago, 2017, and it's from an American artist, Daniel Temkin, who coded a Twitter bot. Twitter is not anymore, luckily, for the very wrong, bad trajectory it has taken, very popular. But 10 years ago, it was quite used to write so-called Twitter bots. Twitter bots were just bots, so pieces of software that were generating 144 or less text. The job that Daniel Temkin did was to generate what he called non-words. So these were words in English that were invented by the bot, invented under precise grammatical and syntactical and semiotical rules, but without a meaning. So words that you might say, oh, this sounds a word that I should know, but I don't know what it means. So it was using the machine to generate good sounding words, but without a meaning. And these words were generated, I think, twice or 3 times per day for quite a bit of time. Then the gesture that Daniel Temkin did was to print a zine with 45 of what he called non-words, with a blank space. So you have this zine, and if you want, you can assign a definition to these words. So to create a new word, a neologism, that at some point, if it's used, since language is a very live entity, can enter the dictionary, the vocabulary. And this is what I call the accidental somehow when it comes to non-human writing. So something that happens because there are some conditions that are created, and then something happens without having a very precise plan that is then enabled somehow. And it's also counting on the linguistic relativity theories. I warmly recommend to explore a little bit these theories, but to boil them down in a nutshell, in a very few words, linguistic relativity theories are really about the fact that the more we get used to certain meanings, the more we completely accept that they are real. And this is one of the probably most dangerous mechanisms that we have now with the huge exposures to all the social media content, but at the same time one of the most interesting one when it comes to culture, when it comes to having a global communication where we can learn and understand things that we wouldn't have been able to access before. Okay, going back to social media, the endless publishing paradigm. By endless publishing, the simplest way to refer to it is, of course, social media. And when it comes to social media, how can we define publishing? In my humble opinion, every single post is an act of publishing. I called it instant publishing, because if you go to the etymology of the word publishing, from Latin, it just means making something public. So every time you make a post that it's public for your own audience, your own followers, friends, you publish something. And then you publish it instantly. That's the difference from the traditional publishing. And it has 3 coordinates: the space of publishing, where you publish it; the time of publishing, when you publish, when it is available and will be available; and the memory. And when I talk about the memory, I directly refer to the fact that this published act will be recorded somehow, will stay, will continue to be accessible in the future. Okay, the space and the concept of a boundless publication. Nowadays, it's very difficult to find boundaries when it comes to publication, especially when we talk about digital. It's very difficult, especially because when we abstract the physicality of publications to the digital, then we have spaces that we don't see. I usually challenge my students in the first semester one day to find out how many files there are on their computer, if they can find out the exact number. And they usually find their way, which is quite beautiful, but they're quite impressed about how many files there are and how much material they already have on their own machines. The thing is that you don't see it as a whole, as you can see a shelf in a library. And then if you think about all the materials that you potentially might access through internet, then it becomes infinite. I mean, just think about all the servers and all the material that is there, and you're already lost in this ocean of culture. So when this concept started, well, it started well before the internet and well before the physical publications. And in fact, what I've tried to do is to reconstruct, especially where in science fiction there were ideas about a boundless publication, a publication that it doesn't have an end somehow, which is also connected, if you want, to our human nature that really pushes us to overcome our own limits. So I found out that there's a thread of ideas about the potentially infinite publication. The first example is quite well known, actually, is the famous Library of Babel by Jorge Luis Borges, and it's in 1941. It's a fascinating short novel about an infinite library. And the author, curiously, doesn't focus on the infiniteness of the library. What he navigates is the indexes. So only, of course, if there are infinite books in this library, the index, the printed index, is equally infinite. And he describes it, and you don't even know where the books are in his tale, but you see that the index, again, has no end, is infinite. And it's made in volumes. The very first occurrence of a boundless publication I found is in this book from Stanisław Lem, brilliant Polish science fiction writer, from 1961, In Return from the Stars. Actually, here, he refers, it's an adventurous, of course, science fiction tale. There is a person that has to carry some information, some manuals especially. And he's using a device, is not more precise than describing as a device, which is called an opton. And this opton device has crystals. The crystals contain the book. So in 1961, he was already thinking about the transformation between the physical book, the medium as such, that can contain only one specific content, into a container, which is what we have now. The opton becomes the container. The crystals are the electronic book somehow that can be exchanged. But the reader, that he calls again the opton, remains exactly the same. So again, here we have the transformation of the medium into a container, which is what we have now. And the other very important thing to consider when we switch to digital, to electronics, is that the screen is a ceaseless space compared to print. I mean, all the graphic designers, again, the quite beautiful talk before mine was really showing the art of organizing a physical space in books. But when it comes to screen, paradoxically enough, we have just a small space. It's bidimensional, but then the content, it's ceaseless. It doesn't have an end. That's also why it's much more difficult to retrieve content on a screen rather than in reality, because in reality we can use our three-dimensional perception, the perception of depth, while on the screen we can't. Again, we have a few examples of that. Well, before internet and computers, this is a kind of funny one. In 1934, there was this comic, this syndicated comic called Can It Be Done? And this specific one was mentioning a television newspaper. Someday you may be able to receive the front page of your morning newspaper this way, fully printed and shown on the screen of a television set. Can it be done? Well, I mean, a few years later, almost 1 century later, we know how it ended. And it's quite fun that here the screen has been adapted to the newspaper. So it's quite tall. There were no televisions like that back in the days. But the imagination was to have devices the size of the printed matter, which is not actually what has happened. And when it comes to time, we can consider the act and gesture of posting on different internet media as an act of instant publishing. And this instantaneousness has also increased dramatically the amount of publishing that is happening. Not necessarily the quality of it, of course, but the amount has been incredibly increased, growth. At the same time, the instantaneousness creates what we are feeling now, which is something that we are constantly part of, that is constantly happening, and that we have somehow to cope with. Again, an earlier example of that, of this, the envisioning of it, is in the 1967 number, the zero issue, so the pre-issue, the one that is usually not even put on sales, from famous cartoonist Robert Crumb. In issue 0 of Zap, his then famous comic magazine, he has this vignette about from the city of the future, and this guy who is, you see, with a helmet connected with wires to what should be computers and machine, he says everyone will be tuned into everything that's happening all the time. No one will be left out. We will all be normal. Honestly, the last sentence is quite scaring to me. I don't know if now we are all normal. I hope we are not. But this is very close to what has happened somehow over the decades. How we feel, no one will be left out. Actually, we are all in fear to be left out from something important because of everything happening at the same time and being the kind of need to be part of it. So the time is a very essential element, and the quality we ascribe to traditional publications, sophisticated content, finitude and consistency, cannot be applied to online digital systems. Because, I'm talking about major digital systems. Digital systems, especially big platforms, are governed by two characteristics. One is instantaneousness, so the instant publishing, and the other one is abundance. The more content are there, the more the platform can flourish. That's why you are always invited to publish. By any social media wants you to publish as much as possible, and to acknowledge other publication, what other people is publishing, because this abundance creates monetary value somehow. And to understand how the digital works very differently from the printed publication, let's have a look at this particular book, which is one of the 100 that I selected in the appendix. It's called The First 100 Second of One-Bit Symphony, and it's by American musician Tristan Parrish. Tristan Parrish created, one of his works was to create a CD that was, I mean, it was in the form of CD, but it had electronics inside. It was called One-Bit Symphony, and did 1-bit depth. It was generating an endless music composition. What he did then was to publish a book of actually more than 400 pages, printing out all the content, all the digital content that happened in the digital machines, in the computer, in the electronics that you use, in the first 100th of a second. So all the memory statuses, all the instructions, all the changes, that in this infinitesimal, tiny amount of time happen in the machine. And he was able to fill 400 pages, remarking the huge difference between the logic with the materiality that we have and the one that instead governs the digital means. When it comes to memory, when we talk about publishing, memory is about where the content is accumulated. And of course, with printed publications, it's quite easy, but what happens when we translate the digital publications into material ones? Again, to go back in time and find another example, I would like to mention this art installation by Hans Haacke called the Nachrichten News in 1969. It was installed at the very famous software exhibition at the Jewish Museum in 1970, and he did a very simple thing. He put some telex machines, of course, for those much younger than my age, telex would be quite an exoteric word. Telex machines were just meant to transmit text over electric wires at distant times. Distances, sorry. And he put 3 telex machines printing out all the news that a German news agency was delivering constantly, the German press agency DPA. And of course, this news started to accumulate and flow and overflow over the floor in the gallery. What happened then is that he carefully took all of them, folded them, and put them in vitrines, closed. So all the news which were expressing the real time of what was happening around the world were then sealed. And to seal somehow this act of, as an act of preserving the memory of what was produced constantly. And almost 50 years later, there's a different project that is also worth to mention. Again, part of the selection I did for tactical publishing. It's called The Wonder Road by Ross Godwin, 2018. What he did instead was to emulate somehow the path that Jack Kerouac, the writer, the beatnik writer did in the 60s. Jack Kerouac was traveling coast to coast in the United States, bringing with him a typewriter and writing this novel on a single roll of paper. This roll of paper is preserved. It contains the whole novel called On the Road, and sometimes it's shown in exhibitions. What Ross Godwin did was to equip his car with a quite good range of sensors and travel as well from one side of the other, the United States, and the sensors of everything that is happening, the light, cameras, taking pictures and trying with a bit of machine learning to interpret them, are all connected to a computer that is generating this novel and printing it out, again, on a single roll of paper. Memory. Then I would like to mention Umberto Eco, the Italian semiologist, who wrote this wonderful text in 1967, Towards a Semiological Guerrilla Warfare. He says the contents of the message will not depend on the author, but on the technical and sociological characteristics of the medium structure. And he writes again in 1967, and he's mostly thinking about the impact of television and the initial digital computers. He joins a few experiments with generating poetry through computers in that same year. And he thinks at some point the technical and sociological characteristics of the medium structure will determine the contents of the message. And I think we are exactly in this phase now. Now, when it comes to memory, of course, we talk about libraries. And using libraries as cultural guerrillas is what I've tried to investigate in the 5th chapters. Again, free from commercial platforms. First, I would like to introduce a concept which is not mine at all. It's from Marcel Mars, a hacker and philosopher from Zagreb in Croatians. He coined this word, which is custodians, enabling networks to preserve. Custodians, who is a custodian? Where we all are, in some respect, when we preserve something we have, culturally produced or somebody else has produced. So our tiny library, if we have a tiny one or a big one, if we take responsibility to preserve it, means that we are custodians. But we should think about being custodians of the digital content and files and materials that we accumulate. Again, think about all the material that you have in your computer. If you care about it, if you make backups of that, if you think that it should be off internet, and so it should be available only to you and to those you want to share it with. In this respect, with the Neuro magazine, we have embraced a specific project, which we have called the Neuro Archive. And it stems from a consideration that we had in 2012. In 2012, we were about to celebrate 20 years of publishing. And we looked back at our own archives. And we realized that in 20 years, we accumulated a few thousand publications, all about media art, that were just in our private offices. And it's a very interesting process because almost none of these publications were bought. They were all donated by artists, by publishers, by galleries, by institutions. And there are all sorts of publications from the sleek art catalogs to zines. But it's a quite remarkable collection online, about media art, because we realize, I've traveled quite a lot over the last for 25 years. And usually I'm having a look at libraries and what they have about media art and new media art, and usually it's quite disappointing. They have very tiny sections, and there's quite a bit of confusion between the technical and the cultural in these tiny sections. So we realized that this specific collection of an estimated from 6,000, 7,000 publications about media art was quite unique, even internationally. But then it didn't make sense to have it only in our own spaces. And where it is in the southeast of Italy, I have no trust, and we as a redaction have no trust that there could be supported institutionally to give it public access. So what to do? After quite a bit of conversations that I have with archivists and specialists, we came to the conclusion that even just sharing the knowledge of it and the data about it would have been something. It would have meant to take responsibility of it. So what we did was to realize a website. We commissioned the graphic layout of the website. The website is made on the most basic technologies. It's all these technologies, all these software technologies are free software. Even the code is freely downloadable from GitHub, so potentially anybody can make their own archive this way. And what we have done is just to start to publish the data about what we have. So this is a classic record. And we publish the cover, the bibliographical data, and the content index. And technically, publishing the content index is already copyright violation. Honestly, we don't care about that because in the content index there are most interesting information usually about the book. There are the name of the authors, keywords, the chapters, and so on and so forth. This specific book is quite symbolic of what I've tried to define in tactical publishing as sleeping knowledge. It's a book from 1984 called Art and Telecommunication. It's not particularly well known. I was talking 2 weeks ago with a 93-year-old lady who curated one of the very first electronic art show in London, Cybernetic Serendipity, and she didn't know about the existence of this book. Anyway, it was a book published by BIENNALE, an organization in Vienna, and Western Front, which was a video art organization in Vancouver. And it's really about artists that back in the early 80s were using art and telecommunication to make art. I had a residency in Vienna 10 years ago, in 2016, and I was trying to contact the person that after all these years was responsible for the organization that came after BRICS. And I asked to have a few publications donated for the new archive. And I told her, if it happens that you have a copy of this book, we would be incredibly happy to have it because it's considered a rare book and it's very expensive in the rare book, in the second-hand market. Then we meet, she's working at the national television now. She brought me a big bag of books. I was extremely happy to see all of them. And then I see a copy of it and said, I'm really extremely grateful that you brought me one. It's really important for us. But how did you get it? And she said, you know what? When you ask me about that, I went in our small warehouse to find different books that you asked and some others I would have liked to give you. And then I remember there was a box that I never opened at the very end of it. And I reached it. And I opened it for the first time, and it was a box full of art and communication copies. So knowledge, important knowledge, that was just sleeping there for so many years. And somehow we created a mechanism that this knowledge was brought back. And since then, I suggested to donate the remaining copies to libraries that would have preserved that. Okay, last concept I want to share today, the interdependent networks of neural and the distributed archive. Very briefly, the interdependent networks of neural refers to the fact that the magazine is still on print after 32 years, going to be 33. But the total amount of public funding that we have received in 33 years is exactly €0. Neural is a not-for-profit entity, and the challenge that we wanted to embrace in the beginning to publish a magazine about new media art without any kind of funding, but just trying to stay, let's say, on the market of niche independent publishers. I mean, it worked somehow. But then, after 30 years, we looked back, and I started to think, how was that possible, actually? I mean, beyond all the work that we did. And my take is that for independent publishers, what actually happens is that there are networks that are supporting each other. That's why independent publishers and independent distribution of publishing works. Interdependent means that one supports the other, and if you take one network off, it starts to crumble somehow. It starts to be difficult. One concrete example of that is the distributed archive, which stems from the neural archive. Distributed archive is the concept of having not only one isolated archive. When we did the neural archive, my concept was that that was an important one, but there were other archives spread all over the world. Not in libraries, as I mentioned, but mostly through other independent institutions, or sometimes just in the house of journalists who collected stuff. And then I thought the distributed archive should be an archive that connects these different islands of culture. Then they become a kind of distributed archipelagos. And they should not, I mean, with the digital means, they can be connected and they can be searched all together. And after 10 years of thinking and trying, in 2024, 2 years ago, I had another residency at the V2 in Rotterdam. The V2 is one of the most historical institutions about new media art. And we were able to make a prototype, working prototype of what I meant. So, through a very skilled programmer and a few people helping, what we did was that now, if you go to the V2 website and you search for some keywords, in this case the keyword is test, you will have the results from the V2 website, but also on the side, the results from the neural websites. Each of these websites hosts more than 7,000 pages, so you have quite a bit of it. And it happens the same way, the other way around. If you go to the neural website and search the neural website, you will have occurrences also from the V2 website. It might seem like a simple mechanism, but I think it's quite relevant because in this way you connect different archives. And you connect them without a commercial platform. I'm not saying that we should get rid of Google or whatever search engine, but in this way you can make niche searches. In fact, demonstrating once more that the interdependency of independent efforts works quite well. And I'm ending with a last concept, which is the human mesh networks. Again, as a magazine, we were able just to go on thanks to other networks of support. of different kinds, from the subscribers to the distributor to the independent shop selling the magazine, to the libraries, the institutional libraries who subscribe to the magazine. But the concept of mesh networks is a slightly different one. Mesh networks are those networks that are replacing somehow the internet, especially in countries where internet is too expensive in certain, to be brought in certain areas, and they just rely on people sharing the connection in areas, allowing other people to join the digital network. So they are precarious, but curiously they work very well then. Human mesh networks, it's what I mean, it's what we should do. So establishing mesh networks among us in order to work and in order to support independent effort to each other, in order to preserve material and to continue this effort in order to have, to stay and continue to be independent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alessandro.
I was just saying, if there's any question in French, you can help to translate
yes,
it.
Of course.
Yes.
So everybody who wants to ask a question in French or in English, you're most welcome. Donc les questions en français, en anglais, j'essayerai de traduire. Les questions, les réponses, je ferai de mon mieux, ou peut-être vous m'aiderez. En tout cas, allez-y pour une question. What I found interesting is your story of space, because when you are a publisher, space is a big concern, but it's more cube meters. And so it's interesting because we share a word for a completely different meaning, but that is really a big topic of concern.
Yes, yes, it is, it is.
Est-ce que vous avez des questions? Oui, Kevin. Un micro pour Kevin.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I've noticed that you created a lot of opposition between print and digital, and in the same time you show a lot of work that merge the two, that are in a logic of hybridity, generative publication, a publication that have published in-house or by the public itself, or publication that are constantly printing themselves. So I'm wondering, how do you approach these hybrid objects that leverage specificities of the digital platforms, but appears to be in print at the end?
Yes, yeah, thank you. Very interesting question. In the post-digital print, I tried to make a concept of the hybrid publication in 2012. And for me, it was less about having something digital printed or the other way around. Also because, let me just mention that, I do think, and it's what I'm trying to elaborate in these two books, that print and digital have two very different roles. Particularly, I think that printed objects and digital objects are made by very different matter. So even the PDF of the same book is a very different thing than the book, even if it namely has the same content. In this hybrid concept, was kind of science fiction back then. But what I really wanted to think about, to have, would have been a publication that was material, with some material, not necessarily paper, but that was physically able to transmit information somewhere, and especially have some physical consequences somewhere else. So trying, because I mean, what's the purpose of software? And what's the purpose of networks when it comes to publish? I think that the purpose is not only to connect customers to somebody that sells goods. It's the fact that you can actually create something that travels, and possibly the thing that you create that travels instantly over the wires can generate something at the other end. And ideally can even have, again, some physical consequence. So it was quite abstract, of course. I never went back to try to make a prototype of that. Maybe one day, maybe never. But when it comes to hybrid, what I think is that when we think about hybridity between the two words, we have to take into account of their own nature. So use it as much as possible. As we use inks, matter, whatever we want to add in physical publications. For the 30th anniversary, we had a flexi disc, a record in the magazine, made in collaboration with an electronic music label. Again, an extension somehow, but still matter, still physical. With the digital, we should think mostly more than it's just as a representation of the physical, at what it can do. So at its potential with the software that we can embed in it, and at its potential with the transmission that we can have in it. And the combination between software and transmission is something that, let me say, we haven't explored almost at all, and it's 2026. We are still thinking in terms of, I produce a digital good, I sell it. I think we should really think instead about, I produce a digital good, what this digital good can actually do. And can do not only in the digital realm, but also in reality.
Any other question? D'autres questions? Une question ici. Ici. Ah, une ici, puis une ici. Allez-y. Oui.
Hello. So you used a bunch of images regarding the way you see our relationship to media. You talked about being lost in an ocean of culture. You talked about creating archipelagos of information, etc. And of course, it brings the question of the way we organize into societies with one another, blah, blah, blah. And my first question is, do you think in the current organizations that we have, do you think there is such a thing as overconsumption of published media?
Thanks, also very good question, thank you. Is there overconsumption of printed media? No, not of printed media, because printed media has its own pace. And there's the overconsumption is more than overconsumption. I would say we have overexposure. And the overexposure to media is rooted in the fact that we have screens and the infinite content that we can constantly scroll through screens. And that's, I think, the problem. And when you think that one of the most used characteristics of machine learning software is to summarize. I mean, young students are very happy about having, when you assign them to read something that is 5 pages, they would immediately go to whatever AI platform to summarize it in 2 paragraphs, because then they think they can get all of it. And this is the overconsumption, because you want to consume something that it's meant to be 5 pages. I'm not saying that everything long 5 pages is worth reading, but it was meant to be read with the pace that it takes to have 5 pages. You want to consume it in a few minutes as 2 paragraphs. And this is a big issue, because when you delegate to a machine your own, the interface to consume some content, then you lose a lot in between. That's the overconsumption, basically, that we have now. And it's, I don't want to sound bleak, but if we rely to technologies, it's going to be even worse. That's why I'm calling for something different, which is reducing the amount of people we relate to. We don't really need 100, we don't really need 1,000 followers, actually. I mean, if we have a publishing effort, we need probably enough. But this concept that only because we have a global network, we should exploit it all, it's completely wrong. The global network that we have is in the range of possibilities. And it means that as a publisher, for example, all the subscribers, for example, that Neural would need are just there, and are probably just at the 2 degrees of separation. So it's a good thing that we have the networks, but the point is how we administer our own network to avoid overconsumption and overexposure. Reduce them, and having a trusted networks changes everything. I mean, the experience with Neural, I can tell you as a publisher, is that the major income that we have, possibly 85% of the money that we get in order to make the magazine, comes from subscriptions. And to us, subscribers are king. If I receive an email from a subscriber, I probably answer that one before an email from my boss at university. Because it's the most valuable thing. And it's not because the subscribers pays. Because it's about the relationship that you establish. And that's why I'm pushing on human mesh networks. This is what I'm pushing here as much as possible, to avoid overconsumption, which is something induced by the industry, of course. Again, abundance, it's what they are aiming in order to expand the market and expand it even more, and then somehow expand it even when it's completely saturated with some new products and new things to do. The antidote to that is that you regain the control over your own consumption, which means over your own network, and even as publishing business, over your own audience, not thinking that you can become rich with 1 million customers, but thinking, I don't need 1 million customers. I need the amount of customers that are good for me to continue to do what I like to do. And it's the same for the consumption. I don't need to read 1 billion books or 1 billion public. I need the ones that I would really like to read. And that means limiting it, scaling it down.
Thank you very much. One question, one last question.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you very much for the presentation and to share also the online archive. It's so important for us as a teacher or educator or even students to have this kind of online archive. And my question is about the 100 project you selected, because I guess with the project we saw on the presentation, it's maybe linked to the axis of research, but as we saw with the students' choices, with 6 books, sometimes it's really easy to have 6 super distinctive or understandable projects, so 6 or 10, let's say. But you said that you had 100 selected in the book, and how did you manage to have a criteria or a selection which, from where you start, where you stop this selection as the perimeter, because it's a never-ending project or selection or work, I guess?
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for asking about that. Yes. Well, the beauty of print for me is that you can't change it once it's done. And all the regrets about that, all the things, I mean, are there. All the mistakes, even if, I mean, for that specific book, MIT told me that I should have had done, so, sorry to divert, but just for a second, in order to explain the finitude of the selection. I had to hire my own proofreader. So I hired the proofreader, professional one, quite expensive, and she found something like 6,000 corrections, which were also commas that should be moved from one place to the other. And that was making me think a lot. I mean, okay, now I'll have the perfect book. Not at all. I'm sure there will be mistakes afterwards that skipped me and her probably. And that's what I'm sure it happened. But so when do you stop? It's the same when I think you make a selection. It's a temporary one. The moment the book is in print, you discovered, of course, a few more that I would have liked to include there. But that's a kind of a photograph. It's frozen in time. It's what, as it's, I think, every printed publication. And that's, again, the beauty of it. It's something that you decide at some point it's finished. It's the same with a magazine. And then it goes to print. So how I selected the 100, the criterion was after the year 2000, so 21st century. And all of them have one characteristic that is somehow breaking the rules or suggesting a new way of either publishing, archiving, distributing. So this is the criteria. So they somehow contribute to reimagine these three different characteristics. Also reading, of course, a different type of reading. I picked them up from quite different domains, trying to be as heterogeneous as possible. So not only artist books, but also experiments made with the commercial publications. I just remember one, and then I'll probably have to quickly wrap up. One of the ones that is mentioned is a magazine that used HIV/AIDS-infected blood mixed with the inks for an issue dedicated to HIV infected people and cultures and history. And they made it in a way that was safe, of course, to handle. You can handle the magazine with no problem. But it's a commercial magazine, so they got a lot. There's a small percentage, of course, of this blood in each and every magazine, but there is. So you see, it's not technically an artist magazine, but it's something that we should think about, again, about the materiality. Ink is very material. So this was the criteria, to give opportunities, to think about what publishing means. And I think this is what a book like Tactical Publishing or a book in general about publishing should be. Give opportunities to think more about what publishing can accomplish somehow. I think there's a lot that we haven't experimented yet, and we can. And when it comes to, when we join it with the possibility and access possibilities of digital, then they become really a lot. Thank you very much.